Go. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome back. My name is Jonathan Lipp. I'm the director of the Big Apple Film Festival. Thank you all for being here for our third night of conferences. So tonight we're going to be talking about the filmmaking process, pre-production, through production, distribution, and so forth. So let me introduce our panelists. So we have, we'll start all the way down, we have Eitan Gorlin. Next to Eitan, we have Debra Eisenstadt. Next to Debra, we have Jeremy Levine. And next to Jeremy, we have Claude Kerven. So I'll ask... So why don't we first ask each of the panels to tell us a bit about themselves. We'll start with Claude.
Start with me?
Yeah.
Currently I'm the chair of the filmmaking program at the New York Film Academy. Been doing that for about 12 years. Before that I worked professionally in television, probably most notably at Saturday Night Live, where I worked for about 4 or 5 years. I worked as a screenwriter in LA for a while for a gentleman named Sam Raimi. Had one of my films actually made. It's called Mortal Thoughts, starred Bruce Willis, and if you rent it, I get about $0.25 penny. So, the residuals are great. So, thank you.
So I'm Jeremy Levine. I've been making films, mostly documentaries, for the last decade or so. My last film, For Akeem, is a coming-of-age story of a black teenage girl in North St. Louis. It's on Amazon Prime, where we probably get less than $0.25 penny each time you watch it. I'm not totally sure how it works, but it's available to watch there. It premiered at Berlin. It was here in Tribeca, and kind of toured around from there. And my film before that, Good Fortune, was about foreign aid gone wrong in Kenya, and it kind of blew me away when it won an Emmy in 2010. Both of these were collaborators with Landon Van Soest, another filmmaker here. And the two of us also started a group called the Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective. That's a peer workshop group in Brooklyn, which, is one of the things that I think sustains me in my work is really having that community. So excited to talk to you all more.
Hi, I'm Debra Eisenstadt, and I actually have a film that's here at 8:45. I think there's 12 tickets left, called Imaginary Order. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival and Competition. That was my 4th film. I've been an independent filmmaker, writing, directing, producing, and editing my films for quite some time. I won an Independent Spirit Award for my first feature, and before that I was an actress for film, TV, and theater, most notably starring in David Mamet's Oleana film and play. And I also produced some documentaries with my husband, who last was Jane, the Jane Goodall documentary, and Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck.
Hi, I'm Eitan Gorlin. I started working in film in the 90s. I think when people were making kind of Super 16 and blowing it up to 35. And I still think you kind of, even on the low budget films, you had this ethic of Hollywood. Right? The expressions, what you were allowed to do, what you weren't allowed to do. I always wrote scripts, but I worked initially as a grip, and then I produced a low budget movie, and then I wrote and directed a film in Israel called The Holy Land. That was around, I think it came out around 2003. Actually, Debra was on the jury that
He won the grand jury
that awarded the grand jury prize at
Very
Slamdance.
talented.
And then, I've continued always to write scripts. I worked on a documentary about a boxing manager that I never quite finished, but I was able to segue that into a television pilot in Bible, which there's, it's been optioned, and now there's some renewed interest in. I live mostly in Israel now, and I'm involved in a project that's also could be a TV show having to do with Israel in the 70s too had a Black Panthers movement. I mean, they called themselves the Black Panthers, mostly because they weren't quite sure what it was. They'd heard about it, and it seemed relevant to what they were doing. But it was, it's a social phenomenon in Israel that started in Jerusalem, that spoke to the immigrants that had come from Arab countries. So I'm working on a project having to do with that. And then something I wrote was made by Cuba Gooding a year or 2 ago. I mean, I wrote it set in LA as Burbank Caviar, and then it was changed to New Orleans and called Bayou Caviar.
So let me first, Claude, so you mentioned you had a script, Moral Thoughts, which you sold to Universal, made into a film with Bruce Willis to be more Harvey Keitel. So we have screenwriters here. What advice might you give to a screenwriter who's looking to have the same sort of success? They want to get their script sold to a studio or production company.
I would say be cautious about getting named people into your film. I know everybody says that's the way to raise money, but I've discovered that people with a lot of power and influence know that you have the money because they're on your film, and some of them are very free about using their power to get their way about the story. As you can tell, I wasn't really happy with the way the film came out. But look, it's the hardest thing is get people to read your scripts. I was really lucky at the time. I had been directing for about 4 or 5 years. I had an agent. The agent, of course, represented a producer. And as you know, they all like to package things in-house. So I didn't have the struggle that everybody has to face, which is, I have a great script. Who's going to read it? Right? How do I get it seen? So I guess I was just lucky in that way.
So Jeremy, you've been in the sort of the documentary world. What do you think about the documentary market nowadays? Like, I want to focus for a moment on theatrical. Do you think, is that a sort of a market, is a viable market still, the theatrical world of documentaries?
I think it's really interesting because there's a surge in interest in documentaries, and there's also kind of a glut of films being made, and so there are a few that really break out every year. Free Solo made, I think it broke records at the box office and showed that films like this can really make an impact and make money. And I think the RBG documentary also did incredibly well, and actually it came out before the fiction version, and I think really ate up a lot of their sales. So it is kind of this new force, but there's also just so much competition that it's really a handful of docs that that can actually make money theatrically. Primarily, it's still a pretty useful thing if you can pull it off for publicity, to raise the profile, raise awareness of the film. As a stream of revenue, I don't know that it's necessarily the best choice for most docs.
So Debra, going back to pre-production, on Tuesday night here, we had a conversation about casting. So when you write a script, what's your first step as far as the casting process? How do you go about that?
Well, because I was an actress, I really don't like auditions. And I kind of do it in a way that's, my own version. And what I like to do is have a draft of the script. And because I know a lot of actors, I'll cast a reading. And I think it's really helpful, as the writer, to hear your script out loud. And it's also helpful to look at the actors and see if there are any that are in the right, will work for the film. And generally, I cast from the readings. And casting directors will, if you're casting a reading, they can get you some really good actors for that reading, if you don't know them. But if you know, you get to call on a casting director. So it's sort of a combination. I had some casting directors help me cast some of the readings for this film that's here. And I did about 2 or 3, I did 3 readings. This was it was a long pre-production process, and it took a long time to get this particular film made. But with each reading, the script would also get a lot better. And it also, you can tell in the room if the actors are getting excited about your script, that tells you a lot. If they're not, it also tells you a lot. Do
you ever write a character for a specific actor?
Yes, the film I did before this film is called Before the Sun Explodes, which was an extraordinarily low-budget film, and we knew a comedian. It's kind of a dark comedy about a stand-up who's kind of a failed stand-up comedian, and it's sort of an after-hours, one long night in this guy's life. And we had an actor a comedian, a real stand-up, who wanted to do it, and he became a producer because he got us the Laugh Factory to shoot in. So sometimes your actors can come on as producers, and your casting can really inform the script in that way. We used his stand-up, only I made it unfunny. So when I was editing it, which he was actually upset about at first, but then he came around. He came around, but
Eitan, you're a writer and a director. So when you write a script, how do you work with actors who may want to change things around a bit? Are you flexible in that area?
I would say these days I've been writing more than directing. When I directed The Holy Land, no, I mean, like Debra was saying, I mean, when you hear it read back to you, when you work with actors, it just gets better. I mean, you can totally, of course, you can improve on the dialogue and improve on the dynamic when you hear it, when there's more people involved. But I assume you're referring to just the Cuba Gooding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be. It's a frustrating thing that writers often go through when you see your script changed, and you put a lot of time into it, and you felt like you brought it to a very precise place.
Right.
And so that's a choice people have to make. How desperate are they to get their product out there, and do they have enough patience and self-confidence, to see it through more in line with your vision.
Right. And I just want to ask, in the very beginning, when you have the script, right? As many of our audience members, they have the screenplay, they want to get it made. What would you say is one of the first steps? Do you try to get actors attached first? Do you try to get the financing first? So I'm sort of a general question to each of you. Claude, how would you approach that?
I guess it depends on who you know. I mean, if you happen to be an actor and you have a lot of friends and contacts who are actors, if there's somebody who's perfect for the role and you think that they're going to be able to help you raise money, that might be the way you go. If you happen to know a producer who's going to give your project credibility, that was an issue that I faced early on in my career. I had a script but nobody knew who I was. Why would anybody want to do it? And so you start to associate with people who have done it before, and that kind of raises your level of credibility. So I guess it really depends on taking advantage of the contacts that you have, whoever they might be. And don't be shy about it. I know a lot of people are very hesitant. I have an uncle and he knows somebody, but I don't want to give them a call. Do it. That's how everybody got into the business, right? So just don't be shy about that.
As you can tell, most of my experience is in documentary. I do have a lot of friends and people in the collective who make narratives and definitely approach it more from the indie side. And I know, we both kind of do a similar process of you take a script to pitches, to marketplaces, to Berlin, for documentaries, there's a big pitch in Hot Docs in Toronto. And I guess I'm curious to kind of add on to the question too, how many of you have done shorts to help promote a feature, which seems like it's something that's done a lot for narratives. It's like a proof of concept and isn't done as much with documentaries, although it's something I want to do with a future project, and it seems like a smart thing to borrow from the fiction world.
To answer your question, I have not done that. I don't know that I would do that simply because it seems like so time consuming, and I'd rather just focus on, I don't know. I just personally haven't. I think, when you're first starting out and you have a script and you don't have any connections, which was, when I started going, this was like 2001, people were not making little digital movies. So I did this, was in graduate school, went back to film school after, being a bit disillusioned with the world of acting and miserable as an actress. I went back to film school and I just really wanted to make a feature. I made a short first, and that was like a separate thing. And then when I made my feature, I just worked with exactly what was in front of me. And you can do that so easily. Like, I have an iPhone. People are shooting films on their iPhones. So you don't need names. You just need to have a really good story, really good performances, and you will get noticed, and that's how you get to the next level. But, it's more competitive than ever as a result of having this technology. But if it's meant to be, your thing will rise to the top, your vision. And you should just work with whatever locations you have, whatever actors you have that are accessible, because it's possible. And it doesn't seem like even this film that I just made, I thought I needed a big name. And I don't think it really don't think it mattered. I wasted a lot of time waiting for big actors to read the script. I mean, years of waiting. And finally, I ripped the script away from that producer and I made it again for like no money. And it got into Sundance, you know? You have to just get it done.
I agree with Debra. There's something to be said for creating your own momentum. And I think usually the people who wait, it often never happens. And there's a tendency that of people getting onto the train, they always say no one wants to be first. There's a lot of people who are, banging on the door to be second, but there's very few people who want to be first. My sense is that it's very difficult now to make feature films. Because I hear that all the time when even serious people who look at my work, and they're always more interested in television material. And they always emphasize to you how difficult it is to make features now. But my sense is what do you need to make a movie? You need money. Or a lot of skilled people to work for free. My sense, just because I've been through it a lot of times, and what I would do, and that's kind of how I stopped directing, and I'm not sure I stopped directing, but started directing less, is I also realized that, or at least that's what I was told, is that the way you get movies made is through the talent, is through the big names. There's actually investors out there who almost like a fantasy baseball league, in which every actor has some kind of value. And then also actors have a tendency to attract other actors. So I started doing something where my first step would be to attract something of a celebrity director. And that's actually this last project, that's how it even got to Cuba. He wouldn't have read it if it was written by me, but it was, I'm sorry, it was written by me, but he was attracted to the director that I had attached. So for me, I found that it's also a helpful first step to attract a director that actors have heard of and want to work with. And then supposedly, if you can line up certain actors, they say, again, I don't know how true this is, but I heard this a lot from producers. If you can somehow get together $500,000 or give the impression that you have $500,000, you can often make a $3 million movie. I don't know why. That's secretly. So those are the elements. You need some sort of known entity, whether it's an actor or a director, sometimes a producer, that could then draw the money. Again, if you have the money, most actors work for a paycheck. If there's a start date and you're offering them a paycheck, who knows what kind of gambling debts they have? When you offer somebody a job, that's the hardest thing, is to get somebody to sign on when they know they're just doing you a favor. Well, I'm attaching my name so that other people will become interested, but if it's just like, hey man, we're starting to shoot on September 1st, this is how much you're going to get paid, you'd be surprised how many, that's kind of Dan Mervish's approach. You'd be surprised how many big name actors say yes. Really set a date thing. Make it seem like it's happening, and you're just looking to hire them. And it's much more effective than asking people for favors.
There's also a lot of actors looking to insert, or need a kickstart, need to restart their careers. There's a lot of actors that were very successful and then they're not, and they're more likely to come onto a film.
Nowadays, we hear this concept of binge watching. The series, the episodic thing is becoming a trend, or is a trend now. For filmmakers who are sort of just starting out, would you sort of recommend that as a way to go now, as opposed to the traditional feature film, even the world of documentaries, docuseries? I don't know, what's your perspective on that?
I guess it's as competitive as anything else. I'm sure before somebody's going to invest in a pilot episode that's going to generate hopefully 2 or 3 seasons, if it's not just a limited run, they're going to have the idea that they're going to be making some money from this. So it is a fun thing to try to create a pilot episode, because it allows you to really take your characters far beyond what you would do in a feature film. But obviously you have to have an idea that's going to interest somebody and make them realize this is something that's going to have legs. It's going to be something that can continue to play on and gather interest.
I think there are exciting new things. There's, big Netflix series that get huge audiences for docs as well. I would emphasize, it's really about finding what's right for your project, and I think these trends change so quickly that it isn't worth chasing them necessarily. It's about, my story should be told as a feature, my story should be told as a series, and using that as your guide. I suppose if somebody, at Netflix is like, well, we'll give you $1 million an episode for this doc series, then go ahead and do that if you think you can make it work. But ultimately, you should be pushing what your vision for the project and the story is.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, again, there's YouTube, there's all these other avenues now with the internet. People are getting their YouTube series made into television shows. And it's so easy, I mean, not easy, but if you have an idea, you can make it yourself. So I just think now, more than ever, it's so much easier to just create something from almost nothing for no money with the technology that's in your pocket with your phone. I mean, if you really want to get it done, and that's the only thing you have, you can do it. You can learn how to edit on your computer, and you can learn how to shoot, and learn things on YouTube. I mean, like, you don't even have to leave your apartment. You can make a feature.
I guess you write what's most comfortable for you. I think somebody once said to me that I guess television of the last 20 years, in some regards, is very similar to what we used to call independent film, with these flawed protagonists. So in some ways, I think the indie style of writing is in some ways similar to what you'd call a cable television writing.
So, does anybody have any? Okay, we have a question right here. Go ahead.
This question is for Debra. You mentioned casting readings. Does an actor get paid for a reading? Do you have an audience for your reading? How does that work?
She asked if the actors get paid for the reading. No.
Okay.
And yes, I'll invite people I trust who will give me good, I think their notes are valuable. It's a good opportunity to try to get producers to see the film who might be interested in helping you produce the film. And anyone else who might help get it made or get excited, you'd want to get excited about. If you feel like you're not ready to show it to producers yet, you don't want to invite them.
And you get a casting person that you asked to cast it?
No. I mean, they haven't asked me for money when I've done it.
Okay.
Question, right in the front here, yes.
I have a question for Debra, and then just one for everybody. You said that you made your movie for next to nothing. Can you define what that means?
Oh, sure.
Defining
My
next to
first feature, that's the one that won the Independent Spirit Award that I made as a thesis for graduate school, I made for $10,000. I've never made a film for over $1 million, my biggest budget has been not even close to $1 million.
The other question I had was you mentioned using sort of relatively unknown actors, shooting with cheaper equipment, finding an older actor that needs to restart her or his career. What other suggestions do you have, like, in terms of trying to keep the budget for a feature lower?
Okay, the question is suggestions for keeping the budget low on a feature film.
No trailers. Use locations of your friends or of the ones that you own already. Write the script around those locations. Find people who are hungry, basically, like people who really want to be in a movie. And there's a lot of people that really want to be in a movie. And hopefully you can find people like that who are also really talented, because there's a lot of really talented people who are out of work. And they just want to be creative. And that's really been my way of making movies for very little money, is finding really talented people who want to work on, even if they do like huge commercial stuff, there's still people that want to do something creative and want to be able and collaborate with them, so that it gives them the incentive to want to work with you, or you're listening to their ideas and letting them be creative. So I think people will work for virtually nothing just so that they can get out of their commercial grind work to do like a passion project. And I think that's how these things get made.
Yeah, and I would add, in a similar note, finding a community that, you ask favors from them, and you can also kind of give back to what they're working on as well.
I would say there's all kinds of interesting casting strategies that you can use. Aside from people who need to regenerate their careers, there are people who are maybe husband and wife, they never get to act in a film together and they're living in New York City this summer. So there's an opportunity to try to get somebody just for the opportunity, or maybe they have a child who's trying to break into acting, so it's a parent and child situation. So there are all kinds of interesting strategies, giving somebody a chance to play something that's outside of what they usually get offered, especially if they're generally pigeonholed as a certain kind of certain character. So being inventive with the casting is a big thing. And to reiterate what you said, there's so many talented people in New York City. And often many of them are on the verge of their own careers taking off, and if you happen to get them in your film, when their career takes off, you suddenly find producers and other people calling you to see your film because they want to check out the actor's performance, but at the same time they're watching your film.
I'm going to add something too. I did a lot of also going to like open mic nights because there's some really talented people like that nobody knows who they are, and it's almost like being a talent scout, and it's actually really fun. And going to plays and watching people's performances on stage and seeing like just really finding the right people for your film that haven't had a chance. Also students. There's some brilliant students, you know, at NYU or at USC or who haven't broken out yet, and they want the experience, they want the credit on their resume.
We got a question. Okay, go ahead. We're right there.
Yes, you know, you're talking about keeping the budget low. How do you yourselves make a living? How do you make your money at the end of your project?
Okay, question is, how does one make a living making budget films?
That's why I became a teacher.
That's why I'm becoming a teacher.
My husband's really a successful documentary filmmaker, and I produce his films, and then I get to make mine on when he's not.
In my case, I've done other jobs, but also sometimes you get paid to write a script, sometimes you sell something. From your own film, I think unless it's a real blockbuster, it's probably challenging to make a living.
Yeah, and there's also like teaching, you know, like script doctoring and
okay, let's go towards the back. Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering how you all approach networking, and just, you know, that can be sort of challenging for some people. So is there anything that you employ?
Strategies for networking.
I answered the first part of your question. I find that most artists are not really good at self-promotion. They're really uncomfortable trying to pitch themselves and sell themselves. And I know so many really talented people who will be at a festival event, and they're the first one to leave when it's over. You know, they see that group of people who are surrounding the celebrity, and they go, I don't want to be one of those people. You know, if you wait for somebody to knock on your door, no one's going to knock on your door. You know, I think you really have to put yourself out. I know you don't want to seem like a used car salesman about it, so I think part of that comes from really believing in yourself and the project so you can talk about it passionately and authentically. But being the person who stays around and shaking hands and getting people's cards and introducing yourself and following up with calls. And again, I've only known two people who were great at that even from the word go. One was Spike Lee and the other one was Jim Jarmusch. And they knew how to promote their films even when we were in film school. But again, most people I know who are artists are not that type of person.
It is incredibly important to do, and maybe something you just kind of have to push yourself to do, even if you don't like it. And I think it is about spending that extra time staying. You know, the producer, one of the producers on For Akeem, Yabo Boyd, is like amazing at this, and I always would like look to her and be, because she just knows everybody. Anyone who I ever talk to, when they've heard about For Akeem, they're usually like, oh, I met Yabo at this event. And you know, she likes meeting people. She likes talking to people about films. She likes staying late and singing karaoke with people. And I think that, right, like it's ultimately a industry that's built on relationships, and so having those relationships is key.
I'm not going to answer this question. That's my Achilles heel, frankly. I'm very much I like to be alone, and I don't really, I have trouble. So I envy the people who can do that.
think most people would agree, that it's most important to put the emphasis on the quality of your work. Because at the end of the day, people aren't going to spend millions of dollars on you, because you laughed for a couple of minutes, at 11:30 at night at an open bar. Like, at the end of the day, people have to make great investment in you, and I think they're going to do it because they think it benefits them, or because they think that you're a smart investment. I remember when I lived in Los Angeles years ago, I'd have a friend who would take me to these networking events, and you'd just see hundreds of, I don't know how many people, all, what's the expression, like chickens without heads. But there's something a little. I think demeaning is too extreme a word, but there's something false about it. And I guess some people pull it off better. And if you kind of accept that everybody's sort of, we're not judging each other, we're not criticizing each other, we're trying to help each other and fulfill our dreams. So I guess you can make arguments on behalf of networking, but I think it's also can be a slippery slope that kind of takes you nowhere.
Okay. See a question right here. Go ahead.
Kind of piggybacks off of your question about success and making money off of it. But would you say that there was a habit that perhaps you changed that brought you to more success in your career? You've obviously all been working for quite some time, but what was that, like, a key habit or practice maybe that you changed that you felt like maybe brought your film or films to better success?
Okay, what's something you changed in your lives that have helped enhance your success? Let's start.
I don't know how to answer that. I think that from the moment I started working on films, whether I was a Brit or an AC or whatever I was doing, I loved it. I just had a passion for it. And I see that with my students. The ones who I have a feeling are going to succeed are the ones who, you don't have to ask them to take that heavy thing and walk at 5 flights up the stairs. They just jump to the opportunity because they love that. So I think if you're in a position where you have to change habits, maybe it's not the right field for you. I know that can be really challenging if you're doing a full-time day job. Being able to come home and have a life and still start writing or working on your thing at 9 or 10 o'clock at night and staying up till 2 in the morning. But if you feel that, you don't have to strain. It just kind of comes,
I think it's ultimately a game of like survival. It's about persistence. It's about, right, you're gonna be told no 8,000 times, and if you keep asking, like that's how you get a film made. It's really the only way to get a film made. Or to maybe not even ask and just find a way to do it. I would say, I'm trying to think of a specific habit. There's something that I've started doing over the last 2 years or so that I find incredibly helpful for me. And I think as artists, it's important to build a practice. I read this book, The Artist's Way, that I would recommend, even though the entire time I was like cursing it. I was like, this is some like stupid hippie like bullshit. And then at the end of it, I was like, that was incredibly useful. And one of the most useful pieces is this idea of morning pages, where you essentially wake up, sit down to an open notebook, and write 3 pages of anything. And I'm somebody who's like, my normal way of writing is I write a sentence, I look at it, I'm like, that is the worst fucking sentence that was ever written, and I delete it, and I write it again, and then 2 hours pass, and maybe I have a paragraph. And so this was a totally new way of doing it, where it was like, it doesn't matter what I write, it doesn't matter what I write about, it doesn't matter, like, none of this matters, it's just about the habit of writing, about, like, your hand moving across the paper. And so many interesting things came up for me, ideas, and even just ways of convincing you to keep pushing these projects after you get 8,000 no's, right? So this is something that's worked well for me. But I think for every person, it's kind of a different practice that really resonates.
Yeah, I was gonna say what he was saying, like when they tell you can't do something, I was constantly told you can't edit that on your computer if you don't have enough space, or you can't do this. I managed to somehow, it's almost like having, like how bumblebees don't know they can't fly, but they still fly. You kind of have to be like that, where you just know in your mind, and you have to, I think focus is the main thing too. You have to learn to really focus for long periods of time on what you're doing, and you know you're in the right space when you've been focusing for about 8 hours and it feels like half an hour. Whether it's the script or whatever you're doing, it should feel kind of transcendent at some point. Not all, all the time is going to be difficult, but there are moments of where you're sort of in this transcendent place, and it's kind of indescribable, and that's what makes it worth doing. The rest of it is just grueling work, frankly.
I'm trying to think of some of the lessons that I learned along the way. I think one is be careful showing people rough drafts and rough cuts, because you kind of see where it's heading. But there's a lot of people who you just get one shot with, and they're only going to give you a couple of seconds of their attention, and if it doesn't click for them, they kind of just push it aside. And I think we have this inclination, both with scripts and with cuts, to show people almost prematurely. And I think that's a lesson I learned.
Let's go more. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment that I just wondered if you would all comment on it. We make films that we can make money with. We've made 7 features and we're a band. We tour with the films around the world and we make our money back. We set our budgets very low and we do it from the old way. The beginning filmmakers said, how can I make money on this? The original filmmaker. They said, oh, we're going to open at 20 houses so we could spend this much money. So we thought we'd work that way. But I know personally 4 or 5 other filmmakers that tour with their films, always make their money back, create a fan base for their films, and then make another one. I wonder if you knew people, anyone like that, or if you had any comments on either that, being able to monetize in a small bread and butter way, and also on the artist collective. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because we always put together an artist collective and share the profits evenly with all the artists once the money from the film is brought back. I just wondered if you had comments on that.
I've never heard of anybody doing that. That's so exciting. You tour around with your own film?
Yeah, no, actually,
wow.
5 or 6 other filmmakers we met that some of them go in a Winnebago around America. They do their shows.
It's like being in a rock
band. We just did 12 test screenings of Harvey.
How do you do the booking?
We're Robin and I, my wife and I, we book. She's a great booking. See, we started as a band touring, so it was normal. Since a kid, I've been touring with a record. And a friend of ours, we made an experimental film, and a cinema owner said, why don't you tour with your films? It was like, ding. So we did that.
I remember working with a distribution company and having this sense too, that at the end of the day, they're just making phone calls. So if you have the, it makes sense.
Oh, you should be on this panel. I mean, you can teach me because I don't.
Anyone like that, or what about the artist collective model? Do you have any comments on that?
So I was invited, and one of my big regrets was, as an undergrad, one of my films was invited on this bicycle tour that this filmmaker Bill Brown did, and I didn't go, and I don't know why I didn't go, but that sounds amazing. I don't know that he made a lot of money doing it. I would love to hear about strategies for doing that. He's a professor as well, so I think that's how he makes his money. But I do think there's always new ways, right? Like, distribution is almost as creative as making a film, and so I do think always thinking of new ways of getting your work out there and trying to make a living doing so is really smart.
I think there's a documentary on what you're doing.
Anybody want to make it?
I would watch it.
I want you to take my film on tour with you.
For filmmakers, just there's hope in the air. Pop-up screenings are starting to happen, just like house concerts are happening. We bought a little $500 projector, and we just did 12 test screenings of this movie while I was editing it. We made $7,000 in 7 months. So you get 50, 60 people, they throw $20 in the hat. It adds up.
With a potluck dinner.
Yeah, I'm just saying there are ways to do it.
And I don't know specifically to your point about like equal profit sharing, but I mean it is a fairly common model where people work on points, and as money comes in, they get
And I'm sorry. Did you have a question as well? Yeah.
Can you talk about going to film school versus versus just starting to make shit and learning as you go. Because as Debra mentioned, it's so easy. You take out your phone, you can get creative, you can start to make things, and you can put it on YouTube or you can put it on Vimeo, and submit to the film. Like, you can do it and sort of learn as you go, or go the appropriate way and go to film school. I don't know.
Film school or make a movie?
All right, well, I'm the chair of the film department, so you know where I'm gonna come down on this. I would just say for some people, they're not really self-starters. And when you're in film school, there's this week when it's your production week, and the equipment is there for you, and the crew is there for you, and everybody's there to support you, and you're getting insurance, and you're getting all your gear, and I just think it allows you to really focus on the creative aspects of making your film. I think when you work independently, you end up wearing like 20 hats. You're the caterer, you're the transportation captain, you're doing everything, and all those things, to me, are a distraction. So I'm a believer in it. And I also think you get the opportunity to not just learn from your own experience, but to learn from the experience of your classmates, watching all of them go through the early process of shooting and rough cut and fine cuts. It allows you to see things that you're going to use in your own career and avoid mistakes you've seen other people make. So I'm a believer in it. It's just too damn expensive, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, film school is great. I don't think there's one right path for everybody. You know, ultimately, I had amazing professors. Even with that, I would say what I learned most was from going out and doing things. From being like my freshman year, I think I was out in the desert filming these vigilante crazy men along the U.S.-Mexico border, and so this being in the field, trying to figure it out, that's how I ultimately learned. And I think it's by making mistakes, and every project you make mistakes, and I think that's the best way to learn, and it's great to learn from other people as well. I think one of the best parts about going to a film school, if that's the route you take, is in addition to the equipment and the incredible instructors that you hopefully have, is your classmates become a community, and I think to me it just kind of keeps going back to, it's not the only way to find a community, but it's a way to find a community. When I was at when Joaquin was at Tribeca, I think it was 2 years ago, there was this young woman who, instead of going to film school, just took kind of the money her parents saved up, which she was lucky enough to have, and she wrote, directed, and starred in a film, and ended up premiering at Tribeca. So again, there's no one way to do this.
I didn't actually go to a traditional film school. I was living down the block from the new school, and I was acting at the time, and I was really wanting to find something else, and I did a class at the new school where I made a short film. It was like a film class, and that got into South by Southwest, and I got a scholarship to do their media studies graduate program. And so when I went in there and saw their equipment that was not being used, because people were studying to be academics, really, I was like, well, why don't I make a feature here, And they said, you can't do that. And I was like, why not? And I went ahead and did it with my digital camera, and they didn't really pay much attention to what I was doing. I learned the technical skills there. It wasn't really like film school. Nobody knew or cared what I was really doing. But it gave me the technical skills, and I was able to take my ideas and just work on it at the school, and also get an academic education, mostly documentary actually. And I did internships at HBO, documentary while I was there. I did photojournalist, I was interning with. So it was just meeting interesting people and doing interesting things. It just can't hurt. However,
I also studied a year at the new school. And at the same time, I was working on sets, first as a PA and then mostly as a grip and as an electric. And at some point, I stopped after a year because I thought I was getting more out of working on sets, especially back then when you have film. And because later, our friend Dan Murphy, I played a couple of characters and we did some webisodes and all kinds of online stuff. And there it's talking about two people, one guy shoots, one guy plays the character. You kind of edit together, 2 or 3 friends, work as actors. Everything is shot. You just rig things to vans, and I remember back then you'd have to pay like a Steadicam operator. How much money? Today, like 15-year-olds, right? It was drones. I'm not on set as much today as I once was, but in my case, it was really working on set that I really felt. So by the time, and actually the way I was able to direct one of my scripts was I was working on a low-budget film here in New York, and I was working as a grip, and I became very friendly with the gaffer, and he was a screenwriter, and he had some money, and he had gone to film school, and he wanted to make his film. And I ended up producing his low-budget film, and after producing his film, I was able to get money for my own script. So in my case, I actually met people who were doing the same thing, were working on sets, had their own scripts, and we kind of came together, put something out. And like I said, just working on set, by the time I directed, especially if you're half an actor, you've seen it and lived it so many, it's not hard pretending to be a director. When you're literally 14 hours a day, especially if you're something of an actor, it's not a hard role to figure out after some period of time.
All right, we only have about 2 minutes left here, so in the last 2 minutes, if you can each just give your one piece of advice you would share with our emerging filmmakers and screenwriters.
Well, just to pick up on something you were saying, getting a job on a film set in any capacity is how you start to network and meet people. In addition to what you learn just by being there and seeing how professional sets work, if you have any sort of if you have people skills and you have a good work ethic, I've never seen it feel before that show is over, somebody's telling you about something else they're doing and they want you to come and audition for it. So I think it's really important to get your foot in the door in any way you can. I think when you're doing a 9 to 5 in some unrelated field, very quickly the film industry starts to feel like it's a million miles away. Like even if I had something, I wouldn't know what to do with it. So I think it's really important to get any sort of a job, if you can afford to do that.
If you're looking to make your own films, it's really, I think it's mostly about figuring out what is it that I love, why is it that I love it, what is it that I want to tell the world, and using that as your guidepost, because again, you're going to push up. What's the guy where the rock falls and he keeps pushing it back up? Sisyphus, right? Like that's your job. You have to just keep pushing that damn boulder back up the hill, and eventually you hopefully arrive to a movie, or maybe you do that the rest of your life. I don't know. But I really do think ultimately it's about kind of bringing that passion and finding something that you are willing to kind of keep pushing that boulder up that hill.
Just don't give up. If it means that much to you, you're going to get a lot of rejection. Everybody does, and you just have to be, understand that just comes with the territory. And say nice things to yourself. Don't listen to the negativity. There's so much out there, and people just, try to discourage you. But you have to be the one to encourage yourself.
That would be my sense too, that you can't, in order to just create your own momentum, you have to, if you don't push it forward, chances are no one else will, especially not the agent. This notion that agents ever help people, maybe even Arnold Schwarzenegger, they don't help. The notion that an agent is ever going to help you, I think most of us at some point realize it's rare. Most of us probably have the experience that you did all the work and then you come into their office and sign it and they get their 10 or 15%. But this notion, especially if you're not heard of, especially if you don't have a name, I don't think you can comprehend how little they care about your material. So you really, the notion, I met this guy and he's gonna, come on, the guy's not, he's probably has full-blown ADHD and couldn't finish the script to save his life. But I'm sorry, I have ADHD.
All right, so I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our panelists, Eitan, Gorlin, Debra, Eisenstadt, Levine, and Claude Kerven. Thanks so much.